Welcome everybody. Good to see everyone here. Welcome Xandy and Lance. Thanks for coming on. How are you guys doing today? You're doing well?
I'm well, yes.
Yeah.
Kind of up and down, but mostly well.
Good. As long as in general, it's good. That's on the right track. All right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I'm doing fine.
Yeah, I know it's tough not working right these days. I've been missing doing shows. I know I feel like I say this every time I do one of these webinars, but I would love to go do a gig right now. It sounds like so much fun.
Boy, the European festivals popped up on my calendar today because I forgot to delete them. I was like, oh no.
I was bummed to miss Glastonbury this year. It was the big 50th thing. It was supposed to be fun, but what are you gonna do next year? Hopefully. No, it's exciting to talk about like kind of new technologies and stuff. I know a lot of people that kind of follow the Production Tech Academy are interested in kind of PA setups and stuff and tuning PA systems. So it's really cool to be able to talk about this ELISA system. It's next generation immersive sound. It's so cool. So if you guys could, if you don't mind, I mean, obviously you can't put this system in every venue. I'm sure like a lot of it is venue specific. Where you can actually put it in is very specific places. But if you don't mind, could you guys introduce yourselves and then also tell me in what capacity you had the system deployed, what experience you've had with the system. Lance, you want to start?
Sure. So I mix Alt-J, and we decided to do ELISA at Forest Hills, New York, or the Forest Hill Stadium in Queens. And not only did we decide to do ELISA, we decided to do 23.1 surround with ELISA, which at the first moment I thought, this is going to be insane. There's no way to do this. But it turned out that it was one of the coolest things I've ever done or ever been involved in. So yeah, I mean, that was we did one show there, and then we did two more at Royal Albert Hall at the end of Alt-J's run of shows that, for that tour. And that was pretty much it. Kind of similar, a lot of differences being indoors and outdoors, which I could talk about, and but that was it for me.
Cool. Xandy, you were touring with the system a bit, right?
Yeah, last fall we had a new record cycle, and we jumped up to arena level, and we did two legs. The first leg was with a left-right system. Right after we did 5 days of production rehearsal with ELISA, so I was ready to go. And then the second lesson was all ELISA except for one left-right gig at the Anthem in the middle of the tour. So it's kind of interesting to have to go back and forth right there. And it was also cool to do an arena tour with the left-right and then go to ELISA and have some real experience comparing the two and seeing what I liked and what I didn't like between the two.
Right. So when you had it up, I mean, Lance says you were at 23.1 surround. What is there like a standard with that system that people usually do?
Well, it's scalable. I mean, the standard generally is what they call the focus system, which is in an arena, let's say. And Forest Hills is basically an outdoor arena. It's not a stadium like a great big football stadium. It's about 10,000 seats. Still big, but anyway, just for the scale of it. The focus system is 7 arrays. You basically have 5 that kind of go across the front of the stage or follow the size of the stage, and then a couple of extensions out on the far left and right. And it's scalable. The system is scalable, so you could do only 5 if you had a smaller space. You still need height. You always need height because all of the arrays are above everything. For us doing surround, it was just turned out to be kind of a nice amount that would fit around the arena. Mm-hmm. It could have been 24, it could have been 22, it could have been 10. But that was kind of for the size of that and where the way the structure was built, that's how it worked. It worked well.
Right. So you had a company bring obviously everything in that day. You didn't have to really like tour with the crew to hang this every day, but
no, the funny thing was we were touring, so we had some of it with us anyway.
okay.
But we had to augment it all in New York and find speakers from wherever we could find them. I didn't do any of that, thankfully. My friends that did wanted to pull their hair out a little bit because it was a job. The prep for that was pretty tough. Just that part of it, just the logistics of where are we going to get all the speakers to do this,
Yeah, totally.
So
yeah, Xandy, how many did you guys have a truck full of PA system? I mean, I guess if you were
Yes, we did. And we had to, it was actually different PA going from the left-right leg to the ELISA leg. The biggest thing is K1 doesn't have a dispersion wide enough to do ELISA. ELISA's got to be 120 boxes generally. So we had to do a little bit of juggling there. And we did the 5 hangs for the stage and then 2 on each side actually. So we had 9 hangs for the ELISA system and then 2 outfills and our sub hangs in the center.
So how many points is that altogether? Like,
we needed for this level, we used cable bridges and we split the PA into 2 halves and had each half on a truss. But one of the things that I think might have messed Gambino up a little bit is they tied audio and video together truss wise, and then when you have a problem with one, suddenly everything's coming down and the whole room comes to a halt. We learned from their mistake and separated the things and even separated the PA into 2 halves so that you can have a little more leeway if there's a problem that you need to solve without stopping everyone else from working.
Yeah, it's like, I guess, with kind of new technology, you're kind of playing guinea pig a bit.
There's a lot of bleeding edge, as we used to call it in the computer industry. The extension hangs, the ones that are super wide, there's a big well, how do you get them out there? Because they're over top of bleacher seats in an arena, and you can carry them up one by one, which techs are gonna grumble about for the whole time. And we kind of learned a trick there is you can actually kind of put a point on the floor and swing them over, and the focusing of the extensions is not totally critical, so you can kind of get away with a single point hang and tying them down because you don't have to be down to the inch with those outside guys.
Yeah, that's crazy. So I mean, when you're like kind of building all these systems out and planning it all, were you working with specific systems engineers from L-Acoustics with this stuff, or did you have who were you kind of like partnering with to kind of?
We chose Firehouse because they had done the Lord tour.
Gotcha.
And that it was very important to me to choose a company that had done this before, so that we learned from their mistakes that they'd already made, because we are on the bleeding edge here. And I think that really panned out in our instance, having to tour with us. So Firehouse was amazing. Their dudes are smart and capable. It was a very positive experience. And in general, everything was super smooth. And it can go wrong pretty quick if you're not smart about production, I think.
Yeah, I've definitely heard some horror stories, and who knows, you can't really point the finger with blame too easily because there's so many moving parts with this stuff, and
right.
And it's new technology and everyone's kind of trying to figure it out. But
right.
It's just amazing that you guys are able to pull it off and actually put it in. I haven't been at a concert that's had it deployed yet, so I'm really excited to just kind of to mix on it someday, but also to kind of just to listen to it.
Absolutely.
So I mean, that's all well and good, all this stuff, but I obviously want to get into some mixing stuff and talk about what it was like to actually just be on these systems. And the first thing that comes to mind is panning. Like, and a lot of people ask about panning in general anyway, with just even the stereo system. It's topic of discussion in live sound. You got to think about it, but I mean, it's a whole other world. So, I mean,
I've got a lot. I can say a lot about panning in this system. It's not really panning anymore. If you think about your conventional left-right PA, most of the time it's not even really left right so much as like a kick drum, for instance. It's just dual mono. You've got a kick drum that you're physically or actually feeding a kick drum to both sets of speakers, and your perception is that it's in the center if you're standing in the center. If you're standing off to one side or the other, especially if you're standing right in front of, let's say, your right stack, I mean, you're just hearing the kick drum out of the right stack at that point. You're so far away from the left, there's no perception of any sort of stereo depth anymore. Well, with putting kick drum in the center, let's say on an ELISA system, you're actually putting it in a center array. And if you're standing off to the right, you hear it coming from the center. It's not so much that you're panning it across, panning anything across between any of that anymore and hearing, you know, some sort of phased version of those two speakers. You're actually hearing more of a point source kind of thing. And that does a lot for clarity. At least my experience was it was weird how it sounded. It was weird how much clearer, or my perception of the clarity of things in a mix that I heard every day for, you know, the better part of a year, how much I was just focusing on something and thinking, wow, that is so detailed. I can really hear that. And I mean, that's basically what it comes down to. You're placing things in certain spots. Now, I think, Xandy, I think your mix was a lot more complicated than mine.
Maybe. I had two drummers, and so that's always kind of a thing to deal with in any system, really. And ELISA really helped me deal with that in a kind of reasonable way, because just like you said, you can really experience a lot of clarity because it's only coming from that one speaker source. And I also found it kind of important to actually keep track of exactly which array it was coming from inside of the ELISA system. And because you got 9 arrays in front of you, and you can still get some phasing if you put your point between 2 arrays, it'll come out of both of those arrays, and you'll still get some phasing. So if you are nailed straight on one array, you might actually be a perceivable difference in clarity on a big scale, like inside an arena where you're fighting a lot of blur already, you know.
Were you trying to like mimic the stage, like kind of like try to, as you see it on stage, try to make spatialize things like that?
There is the concept of what you see is what you hear. From the old computers, what you see is what you get. A classic 90s GUI design. Yes, that's where we're at with audio. And I've always kind of obeyed that in my mixing to a certain amount, is just like mimic what's happening on stage. And with ELISA, you can get right there, because like Lance said, when you are standing off to the side and you have something in the center array, it sounds like it's coming from that direction. So you can make it sound like your mix is exactly what's happening on stage. If you want, you're not obligated to do that, but I personally enjoy that a lot. And so what you see is what you get if you obey those panning laws. It breaks down a little bit in the front, because your image goes up, and you kind of have to make some thought in how you set up your fill, how loud your fills are, because the fills are mono and they're going to destroy your ELISA image, but they're also going to bring the image down to in front of you. So that's cool too. So you kind of have to like decide where you want to go on that balance.
The really steep angles, if you're really close to one of the speakers or really off axis of one of the speakers, that starts to seem strange. That starts to, maybe it could be a little off-putting if you're, you know, if you want to hear something and you're way up front, way to one side, and it's coming from, you know, way to the left. Let's say you're way to the right and it's coming, you know, your angle, you're just visually, you can look and see where that speaker is. It's going to sound like that too. And that might be a little strange you know, that might not work that well for that listener. But I found that as I moved back, especially all the way at the back, it sounded remarkably similar to my normal mix because the angle is not that steep anymore, but it retained a serious amount of clarity. I could walk the floor of the it was basically tennis courts. That's what that arena was. I could walk front to back, side to side. I didn't have any of the lobing in the bass that you would usually have. All the low end sounded great, and all of the instruments really sounded the same everywhere I went. The mix pretty much, I could have mixed from anywhere on that floor. So that was startling. That was something I've never experienced.
Yeah, I agree. I experienced the same thing, and it was amazing. That by itself is enough reason to use ELISA. Just the fact that tonality and coverage throughout a very, very large venue is just way, way, way more consistent than you can achieve with the left-right. It's just a huge thing in my mind.
So is that true all the way through the sub frequencies too? Like all the way down, you kind of got that consistency everywhere?
It is true because your low end stuff you tend to put, actually you're kind of mandated with ELISA to put in the center, and the sub is a flown center hang. And so the alignment between your tops and your sub boxes is very, very, very good. Much throughout the venue, much better than you can achieve with any kind of different sub arrays with a left-right system, just because your low end is all coming from generally the same point in the center. And so that extends throughout to the sides, throughout the, it's pretty incredible what a difference that makes in the low end.
We had a little happy accident at Forest Hills where they have some noise issues with the neighborhood. You know, they were really worried about flown subs, and the thing about it is you can get more coverage, you can get better, much more efficient SPL out of less speakers flown you would on the, you know, just on the floor.
All the fat kids.
Yeah. So but the happy accident was, okay, well, we'll bring in subs if the flown doesn't work, if it causes too much sub out in the neighborhood or whatever, we'll have some subs on the floor. So we put them all there. Now it turned out that we didn't have any problems at all with noise. It was awesome. But what we did find was that when you got up to about, it was general admission, and the seating was available almost up to the stage. When you got really close, you were almost a little bit too close for where the subs were throwing. So we turned them on, but they were a lot quieter than they ever would be. But we had little front fill subs, and we ended up with we didn't have a big stack. We just had a row on the floor. So it was good that we had them. It made that the front few rows better, but it didn't interfere with the rest of it. That was the cool part.
How much height do you actually need to fly these? What's the trim height? I mean, do you know?
You need a lot of height because if you think about it, your PA is all across the front of the stage, so it's got to be, you know, above your lights. Anything that's happening lighting wise, video wise, with the sight angles throughout the whole entire venue, your PA has to be 100% above all of that. So it's up there. It's usually if it's a low arena ceiling, it's touching the ceiling, and you're chopping boxes off the top of your arrays actually just to fit the PA in there.
Oh, crazy.
So, there are a lot of theaters that would be hard to do it in, especially theaters with a balcony. I mean, you wouldn't get it under the balcony, I don't think. Arenas, obviously, and stadiums. There are a couple of, there've now been a couple of purpose-built clubs that have it, but it's purpose-built, and it's not something that you would tour with a big light show anyway. Probably it would be.
Oh, we had a We had a big light show.
Yeah, well, Alt J also, you know, it's a pretty amazing, pretty big light show. Hey man, you know, whatever.
Yeah, totally. Hey, yeah, you know, no one goes to hear the lights, right?
Yeah.
But someone asks, how do you handle front fills? Are they all in the same signal or split apart with differing signals for each sound object? I assume it's just kind of a mono mix.
So far, that's my experience. I think they're working on imaging and duplicating what you have above. I don't know where they are with it yet. Do you know, Sandy?
I do. At least when I was using it a couple of months ago, we had a couple of options available from the ELISA processor, and this kind of thing is inside of the ELISA processor now. You're not doing it in your console anymore, because all of this is post panning. So the ELISA processor can give you a mono mix, and it can give you a stereo mix, and it can give you a left center right mix, which I didn't use. And with the stereo mix, you actually have some adjustment on what part of the ELISA width do you want to include in that stereo image. So this is a kind of a detailed technical thing, but I ended up, if people out far can hear my extensions, which has my effects in it, then I actually want my stereo mix to be kind of drier for that outfill. So I ended up kind of having very little of my extensions mix inside of the stereo mix. And that kind of thing would actually bite me if I was trying to send a left right from a festival or something like that. So there's definitely some gotchas in there.
Well, if you were going back and forth between left, right, and ELISA, like, can you talk more about the problems you had when you were trying to like just go from one to the next, or did you have completely separate show files that you used?
I really wanted to have one show file, and I almost got there. But then something kind of bit me on that regard, and that is that a key point is that you're taking direct out of the channel, and I have a ton of stereo channels, and a direct out on your stereo channel, at least on the Digico, obeys your pan, your left-right pan, which I am no longer using with ELISA. And so now my left-right pan is actually messing up my ELISA objects panning, because those are two separate systems. And so at that point, I could not use the same session, but I could start from the same point and pretty much have the same session to start with, and then kind of diverge them to the two different things. Going back and forth is tricky.
I would imagine just even like what you expect to hear when the band starts playing, and you're like, oh wait, that's not what I was hearing last night, you know, and it just try to change your brain, you know. It seems
right. Except that we've been mixing left and right for our entire lives, and we've been mixing this band for our entire lives. So it's more like, oh yeah, this is bicycle, I remember this, you know.
I sort of had a little bit of a different experience. And yeah, same thing. I didn't quite have the same show file. I would find things that didn't, I tried, but I would find things that didn't quite work in both directions. But one of the things I did at the start, I was really intent on, even though the recommended preferred method is direct outs, I was really intent on not destroying the mix that I had, because I loved it. So I did a lot of things where I was mixing to groups anyway for broadcast feeds, and I just sort of translated that to an ELISA mix and added a few other things, and had a few direct outs, I think, but you know, I was using an Avid S6L, and I could patch whatever I wanted wherever anyway. So, you know, things like, I knew I wasn't going to do anything weird with the kick or snare, that my kick and snare bus was effectively going to be one output. So I did a lot of things where I just sub-mixed things and then used those as my direct outs. So in effect, I was able to keep a lot of my, fader level type fader and mute mixing that I'd been using for my left right. and just leave the buses, you know, wherever they needed to be for that day, for that mix. And that's kind of what I was doing anyway, but it afforded me a couple of things that I didn't see coming, which one of the main things, you know, it's a cheap trick, but when I get into some trouble frequency wise, I always run to my 31 band and just make a quick cut and then figure it out, you know, or whatever. But you can't do that because you're effectively, you know, in Sandy's case, it's like having 9 PAs. So you don't really have a you know, nine channel graphic EQ to just make that quick cut. I was able to narrow it down a little bit and use some of my bus EQ to do that kind of fix, and then, you know, figure it out with the system tech. But I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't done that. And that was just kind of a stroke of luck.
I actually found a way past that, Lance. On the Digico has some amazing latching capabilities. And I
knew this.
I brought all of my ELISA mixes actually back into the console for the sole reason of having a version of bus compression, system-wide compression, and a 31 band EQ that we love to grab in the heat of battle, you know, and I could not let go of that. And also a master mute and a master fader is another first question. Like, whoa, there's no master bus, there's no master fader. So bringing all of the ELISA channels actually back through my console gave me an easy solution to that with 31 band EQ.
I think you told me, I saw one of Sandy's shows, and I think you told me that. I think you were explaining that a little bit, and it was just like, well, yeah, you need just for your comfort level, you need things like that. You need to figure out things like that, and you know, like we're saying, on the bleeding edge of technology, you don't necessarily think about all of those scenarios right away. All of the little scenarios and all of the little things that people do in their own comfort zone with their own desk. And I mean, right, the way you usually mix.
So I noticed, Lance, that, you know, I feel like as engineers through our careers, like a lot of our tricks and a lot of our, you know, how do we do stuff and how do we make stuff better and make stuff more fun comes down to grouping and tricks on the grouping and tricks on the master bus. You know, I talked to an engineer that was like, you don't have a master bus? You know, I've got 8 plugins on my master bus that are crucial to just how I set up my mix. And for me, I didn't maintain any grouping at all. And I went all to direct outs on each channel, and that means all of your buses go away. And you gotta like that took a lot of brain damage to like, okay, how do I do stuff anymore? You know, like that drum bus trick that I love, you know, I can't do that anymore. That, you know, is just a lot of things that you have to kind of reevaluate. How do you set up your brain? You know, how do you set up your session? How do you set up your mix? To achieve things that you want to achieve without group tricks anymore. It was a pretty big thing for me.
That's interesting. Well, I can't even imagine like just taking a whole mix and redoing it like that way. You know, because how many channels were you running with that show, Sandy?
A lot. It was 90 from the stage. And then that's another potential gotcha with ELISA is it's 96 total, maximum 96 inputs. So I actually had to do some busing of my effects just because I was out of channels. And that involves some decision making of like, you know, how to accomplish that and where do I put my effects in ELISA.
And that's one thing that makes yours more complicated. I'm really at about 40 channels, 40 real channels of band, and it, you know, it's so that, you know, already is less to deal with. And another reason I went to the bus situation, I was actually trying to get it all down to 32 outputs. And that was just to kill off another piece of hardware. And, basically the MADI card, the interfacing between an S6L and the ELISA processor, the MADI card on an S6L is BNC. The BNC input on the S6L, there's only one. So in order for me to get above the 32 outputs on the S6L card, I would have had to convert it to optical and then go in to the ELISA optically.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't want another piece of hardware. And of course we duplicated everything so we'd have a backup. So that would have been just even more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried really hard to get it down to 32, and I did it. I in hindsight, I almost wish I had just said, forget it. It would have been a little bit easier to go have a few more channels. But anyway, it took a little bit of work. It reminded me of days of multi-tracking on an 8-track where I'm going to punch in on this track at this point, and I'm going to use this one, at this point, in the song, and all that kind of fun stuff that we used to do.
So did your approach to effects change much? Were you guys using like less effects or more, or like more stereo stuff, or were you just trying to translate your original, what you had before, into that system?
For me, it didn't really change too much. I used the extensions for effects a lot. There wasn't as much across the front of the stage, and since I had the surrounds I put some of my effects into the surrounds and found that that was fine too. It like vocal reverbs and things like that. The surrounds it was difficult to figure out what was actually going to work and not cause timing weirdness. That was a fun math problem.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, Lance, I'm glad you said that, because I feel like timing is one of the first things that an engineer should think about when they jump on an ELISA system. And the idea is that, with a left-right system, you can pan your overheads hard left, hard right, and a guy sitting in the center, time arrival between your left-right hang is good, fine. And the guy over on the left, he only hears the left, so the time arrival from the right speaker doesn't matter, and the guy on the right, same difference. But with ELISA, that is not true. So now you have a person over on the right, and they can hear the left hang. So if you pan your drums hard left and hard right, you can have some insane time arrival issues that you don't necessarily hear at front of house, but that are pretty big on the sides. So you have to think about that.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that, because it started making me think about my panning in my stereo mix too, because when you're at a festival with a big wide stage, you can start to get that, especially if you hard pan something that has no correlation to the other side. It all of a sudden it's way over there, which
right.
Like you said, you wouldn't hear in the center.
Right. And you can be talking about 80, 100 milliseconds of delay. That's not just a little bit, that's a huge amount.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know how much, like, when you were really dialing in the mixes, were you guys like walking around these venues just like a lot, trying to get a sense of where it's at everywhere in the room? You kind of have to, right?
Well, so
yeah,
you also no longer have your favorite stereo test track because there's no stereo. And your test track is not a 9.1 or a 23.1 file. So, how do you dial in your PA every day is kind of oh my gosh, that's crazy. How do I do this? I solve that by taking a multi-track mix and kind of simplifying it to just some essentials that use the entire system, just one song and a loop, making it just a little bit. So of course it still drives everyone in the arena crazy for an hour, but it was basically a way for me to evaluate be able to hear every single element in the ELISA system and hear somewhat of my mix and how it's translating, and how, hear kick drum, hear low end, hear the width of stuff and your lead vocal, and how, make sure you can hear everything and your outfills are pointed in the right directions. But I don't know how I would have done that without a multi-track, to be perfectly honest. It was kind of crucial.
I used a multi-track also. I didn't quite get to that point, but I just used a couple of songs just to tune the PA. And we had a lot of data from all the touring anyway, so we knew what we wanted the PA to sound like. So we just did that. We put stuff on and tried to get it there in the same way. It was absolutely not a perfect solution, and that was that was the first time we did it, but it turned out fine. There are a couple of rules I want to mention. There are a couple of rules, quote unquote rules, that I broke in doing this. I had the surrounds. Like we're saying, it's placement. You don't get phase issues when it's point source. Even when you put stuff between speakers, you might still have a little bit of phase anomalies, but all of that's diminished because you're spreading it out across all these point source spots. So basically, you don't want to put the same element in two speakers or two arrays or whatever. However, there were a couple of spots, a couple of things in my mix where I put it everywhere, or I put one thing or maybe a stereo pair everywhere, just for the effect of having it just engulf everything, just because I had it, And that actually worked. It was a single element. There were a couple of times where I put in, there was a bass note or a bass part that just filled everything up. And one of the things that was really awesome was there's a song in our set that has a boys choir, and I just put that all in all the surrounds, basically left on one side, right on the other side. It was a stereo track that I had, and it just sounded like choir coming down from the tops of the arena from everywhere. That was pretty cool. But it was definitely a kind of it was a little bit of a rule break, because there was definitely all sorts of phasing weirdness from that, depending on where you stood. It just didn't matter.
Yeah, with the choir, I guess you can get away with that stuff, right? It's just,
yeah. I mean, it was a moment. It was a moment in the mix. It wasn't screwing with the mix for the whole time. So,
well, and
fun.
I love that idea, Lance. That sounds amazing. And with my band, I had to be careful and be explorative on, like, how do you use this system and use the bling of this system without being too cheesy, because with my band, we're a hipster indie folk rock band, and too much cheese becomes really, really obvious real quick, and in my opinion starts disrespecting the music pretty quickly. But I still want to use the system as much as I can, without going over the edge.
I was really worried about being gimmicky. I didn't want to be gimmicky, and
right.
I didn't know how far I had gone, if it was going to seem gimmicky. There were a couple of cool things that happened in my show in the at Forest Hills, where people were actually moving up into the stands to listen to the surround speakers. you know, they wanted to go hear it, and it was general admission everywhere, so you could go wherever you wanted.
Out of curiosity, what did you put up there? What did you put in all those surrounds?
Oh yeah, I should mention that because they were SIVAs. We used L-Acoustics SIVA around the bowl, and basically that's like having without the SIVA sub included. That's like having the mids and highs of a K2. So it's like one K2 every probably 10 or 15 feet. I don't know. I don't remember what the calculation was, but yeah, it was they all of it together covered and got pretty loud. But obviously you don't want bass, you don't want low frequencies coming from everywhere because it just wouldn't work. So
what mix elements did you put? How did you use that humongous surround system that you had?
Well, some things ELISA allows you to move things all around, and you can either program it or do it in real time with an OCR device, which all of that is really cool stuff. You know, you can do it with an iPad and move things. You can connect it to optical tracking, and if you have a performer that's running around the stage, you can follow him. You can follow the person on stage. And so for me, I programmed I had some track elements that the band plays to a click track, and there's time code for the lighting at this point. So I stole all of that for myself, for my mixes anyway. Pulled out more of what they had, some of the kind of sound effects and nuggets that they had on their records. One being a police siren, for instance. And this is a thing where I was like, well, is this going to be gimmicky or not? And just flew the police siren around the venue. You know, there was a helicopter that did that too. And it sounded like it literally sounded like cops were driving around, you know. It was pretty cool. But again, you know, I don't know. Is that really what the band is about? You know, so it ultimately it went over pretty well. But beyond that, I had set up some zones with auxes that I could put anything out there at any point if I wanted to. I just had to be mindful of, timing. I had to, if I was going to put something there, I had to make sure there was one way of getting it there that would be directly there, and there was another way of getting it there that was delayed, and I had to know which I was doing all the time, so that I wouldn't get weirdness with having. I mean, you couldn't put a snare drum in the back, for instance. You know, it's 200 feet away. It was hard enough to figure out what I could put back there and have it not interfere timing wise with what was going on in the front of the stage. So all this stuff was kind of things like string pads. I could fade them up a little bit so they wouldn't have to be right on the beat, or, like this choir, it was kind of otherworldly anyway and verby. So it could hang over as long as it didn't start early. That was my main issue. Anything that was out in the surrounds couldn't start before what you heard from the stage. You know, that would just that'd be bad. I've actually heard that in a surround concert, and it was not good.
No, it's interesting that
Anyway,
you have to take so many other things into consideration, like when you start getting away from the stereo source. I mean,
well,
crazy.
I mean, that's a unique thing. I honestly, I was interested in initially I was interested in using just the frontal system. I wanted to do that just from the clarity that I heard. And that's why I thought, oh man, you want to do surround? Are you out of your minds, everybody? You know, but I'm glad we did it. I'm so glad we did it. But
So,
anyway,
do you guys think artists are going to be like trying to do this more and more? I mean, when the artists you guys work for, were they like super excited about this? Did they want to like get out there and like hear it and like see what it was all about? I mean, or was it just kind of like, oh, that's something we'll try, whatever, you know? Sandy, what was?
So to the artists, actually, there isn't a whole lot of change to them on stage. We're using the same mics, the same in-ears, the same stage setup, same monitors. Their mixes don't change enormously or at all. They might actually they might notice, our guys notice better isolation from subs with the ELISA system, and they got really used to that. Although I think you can get used to either version of live sound and be happy with it. But on stage, I think it was kind of the same, and until you get out in front of it. And so the manager and the people that are in charge of money and your production manager, those are the guys you need to persuade that it's a good idea and worth doing. And your lighting designer also is the guy that you need to persuade, because you're going to take some of his money away in order to pay for ELISA. So yes, we're going to do it again on a large scale, probably, if we ever have rock shows again. But not necessarily, because it's a big thing, and you're spending more money, you're paying for more techs, your venues have to be able to accommodate it. So it's not to the point where it's even though we love it and we love having done it, it's still not a given to do it. But yeah, absolutely, it was great.
I'd just be curious with that conversation with the booking agent. Like, all right, we have to book this tour, but we can't book any venues that don't have like clearance up top. You know, they.
Yeah. We actually had a venue in the middle of our tour. I think I already said, the Anthem, which is an amazing venue, and we went back to a left-right rig for the Anthem, and we had enough gear to do it with the ELISA system because it was a smaller venue. And we actually ended up kind of regretting not having done an ELISA system in there because they could have accommodated that in that particular venue. Like with the balconies, the way they were set up, I think we could have gotten underneath the balconies. It would have been a little PA, but it would have been enough. It would have been fine. And I think we actually could have done it, but we didn't quite have the balls to do it.
I'm sure somebody's going to be doing it very soon, you know?
I've spoken to Alt J's manager, and it's in the cards if we can make it happen. I don't know where and how exactly, but everyone ended up liking it. When we were in New York, I was bummed out. In New York, they had so much going on because it was New York that they didn't hear even the virtual playback, and we had a production day there where they could have, but they were on TV and they were doing all sorts of promo and all sorts of things going on. But when we did it again at the end of the tour, they came and sat and we just played back a lot of the cool parts of the show, so they got to hear it, and they were like, okay, this is good.
So like how many more audio techs would you need on tour to like make the system happen? Like you need a few, right? You need like
it wasn't bad. We had 2 extra dudes.
Oh really?
And that was it was correct. We had enough people to the idea is you want to be able to load in your ELISA system in the same amount of time as you would load in your left-right rig. And these guys they're amazing at their jobs, and it's amazing to see like one guy in a couple of hangs get a PA up in the air, in 10 minutes or whatever. So yeah, we only had 2 extra dudes, but still that's 2 extra dudes and 2 extra bus bunks and 2 extra salaries.
I don't know how many extra hands we had. I want to say we had 4 or 5 extra people around. We had people from Firehouse coming to New York, and some of the crew from a company called Delta in London when we did Royal Albert Hall. but then, there were extra hands, I know, but I don't know how
Mhm.
many. So that, it does add, it adds a little bit of time and money to the labor side of things. So,
Of course, and that's all the big concern always. If you're talking to managers or accountants or whatever, you're always going to have a finite budget.
yep.
But hopefully, I don't know. I'm excited to see it out on tour. I'm sure it'll get more affordable as the rigging gets. I don't know. All that stuff always gets smaller and more portable as time goes on, the next generations. So very excited to hear it in play at some point. But I just want to grab a couple of these questions, guys, before we run out of time. I think we've kind of covered some of this before, but I'll just read them anyway. From an anonymous attendee, how do you handle front fills? Are they all the same? Oh, we got that one already. Sorry. Odysseus asks, which desk are you using, and do you have ELISA control on the desk? I know we kind of talked about that a bit. Lance, you were using an S6L, and Sandy, you were using SD12,
7.
SD7, right?
Yeah.
And
well,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, for me, I was doing it just before the ELISA controller was available on the S6L. So I did everything on the controller itself and did snapshot editing just like you would with any console. All of the moves and things that I did were done in the controller, where with the plugin and the controller on the desk, it just goes a lot faster. You can do the same things in a faster way. But I think they had implemented it on the Digico at that point, but not quite. It wasn't quite ready for launch on the Avid system. So
For me, I was on the SD7, and there is the little ELISA widget, and you can use your pan knobs, and you can use the little joystick that's on the thing. Your granularity is not good because this little joystick is kind of tiny. So, and you're talking about this huge width field that you're trying to move something around in. So I found myself kind of dependent on snapshots and using that, and I found the control from the desk a struggle actually to use. You're kind of dread being able to move stuff around in the width field, and that's one of the bummers about using ELISA. And I think it's gonna as this whole system matures, that's going to change. It's going to be much easier to be dynamic in your mixing. But I was pretty tied to snapshots.
So I guess as an aside, did you guys notice with all more clarity in the mixes and everything, did you feel like you could be more dynamic with your mixes? Do you feel like you could get softer and still have an impact, or did that feel different than a left-right system?
I could say I could have as good of a mix at a like 3 dB less SPL for sure. It was, so that's not really necessarily more dynamic, but in a lot of places that's welcome, where you could have a really good mix. It sounds like it's louder than it is. Mm-hmm. It fills up. So
I agree wholeheartly with that, and didn't necessarily obey that, but I also found that I could achieve more dynamic range if your crowd allows it. We have one song that's just a duet basically with a saxophone and the lead, and I remember the first time that I used ELISA and having the saxophone panned off to house right, and it comes up to that song, and the sax is panned, and my left right brain is freaking out, like, oh my God, why am I panning the sax? There's poor people over there can't hear it, and then realizing, oh, this is ELISA. Yeah, they can still hear it, and it can, so there were definitely moments in my show where I could have pretty low volume and a pretty sparse mix that I thought was still beautiful and powerful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Cool. All right, one more question here, a couple more. Do do you have any images that show how you place the channels within the ELISA controller, or maybe a verbal description? No, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but
Go ahead, Lance.
There's some, for me, there are a couple of videos that were done, you know, a year or two ago that might have a little bit of one of my mixes showing the controller, you know, the software, the controller software with some of the elements placed. But I mean, honestly, for me, it was, if I'm just verbally talking about it, it was similar to how I would pan things. It's just that it was placed rather than panned. It wasn't a cross speaker so much. And maybe not, I think a little bit tighter focus on drums. They were more in, they weren't spread out quite as much as I normally might have done it.
Right. And, you know, we'll try to get links to those videos. We'll try to track them down and get links and post them in the replay for this.
I mean, there are certain things like bass, kick drum, vocal, lead vocal. I mean, a lot of the time that's always going to be in the center. So it's just, when you look at the controller, they're all just stacked up on top of each other, but they're in the center like they would be, at least for me. They don't have to be, but they are.
All right. Xandy, yeah.
With a lot of elements, looking at the ELISA controller, there's a bunch of little circles with numbers inside of them. So you're kind of taking a step backwards in terms of user interface going there. But like Lance said, I think you obey the same rules that you're used to obeying, except for time arrival. And so your drum image at front of house actually probably is going to be much narrower than with a left right, but it's going to be much better for everyone else throughout the venue. And then I had to break what Lance said, where you put all your low end impact stuff in the center. I have two drummers, so I had to try to see what my boundaries were on trying to sneak stuff out from the center so that I could get some clarity between snares and kicks and see how far I could kind of break those rules and not break the rule of your sub to top alignment.
Yeah. Cool. So Dennis asks, in terms of mixing and building show file, do you need to do different mixing approach compared to normal stereo PA file? And we've talked about this a lot already, but balance, EQ, reverb treatment. Yeah, I think these are all going to be things that, you know, kind of sensory stuff that changes, you know, speaker system to speaker system. Certainly, like, you guys have painted an interesting picture about how stuff might translate from one to the other. It's oh, Lance, you were talking about inside versus outside at the beginning of this. Could you talk about how that was different?
The answer to that question, the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is yes, but it doesn't take that long to get a good mix. When I first put a mix together in basically in the L-Acoustics studio, probably within an hour or even a half an hour, I had something that if I would have just left that mix as a static mix for my whole show, it would have been fine. It would have been a good show. It just wouldn't have been what we ended up with. But outside versus inside, just like any like festival versus arena theater, low end buildup or low mid buildup becomes a thing. You know, that becomes one of your enemies. I didn't even think about it when I was outside. It didn't really present itself as a problem, but inside I heard it immediately, and I was, you know, kind of chasing whatever those frequencies were. And I did use my group buses to eliminate some of it. And when I look back at it, it was pretty dramatic. It was like some drastic cuts and weird stuff, but you know, you just close your eyes and listen, just go with it. Because I mean, I learned that a long time ago. Don't worry about what it looks like, what your EQ curves look like. Just get it there and then figure out why later, maybe, you know,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Like Lance is saying, a lot of the rules of getting a live mix don't change. You know, how sound behaves inside of a venue and outside, and how the speakers sound and volume and hurtiness and low end stuff, all those rules are the same, and all those problems you need to solve just the same as you normally would.
Cool. All right, one more question, guys, and I think then we'll be done. From Caleb, I know you're supposed to import your sound vision file into the ELISA processor. How speaker dependent is the processor? Would it compensate if you were to go to a smaller room with Kara, or pre-prepping with some P series? Would you need to start your mix over? I'll
take a stab and say no. You wouldn't have to start your mix over, and it's really good at reconfiguring whatever speaker system you have. I mean, part of the design is meant to be scalable. So you could, I would theoretically, I would think that you could change all of the speaker elements to Kara in a different venue and effectively use your same mix, and it would be fine. You know, mostly I think all of the systems have been a mixture of Kara and K2. I don't know if anyone's just done K2. I know that in Royal Albert Hall they did a series of concerts where it was just Kara, just 5 arrays of Kara. But yeah, I don't think that's a problem. I think that's one of the easiest things that it does for you is it just works out those new speakers for you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, you're going to notice some changes in tonality, and you're going to be able to compensate with those a lot. You're going to notice some differences in dynamic impact between different boxes, and you know, you're going to be able to compensate for that as well pretty easily. So it's easy to go from box to box, I would guess, although we didn't do it.
Yeah. I mean, I've done something similar to that where I've gone from a K2 to a Kara in the middle of a tour, and I was surprised at how not hard it was. You know, I was able to get my mix. It was just a smaller space and didn't really call for the K2, or it wasn't feasible. So I would assume it's the same.
Yeah. No, I mean all the L-Acoustic stuff really kind of sounds good. I think they have a lot of smart people there working on this stuff, you know. I think that as a company, their vision with everything is pretty on point. So I'm sure just a lot of this stuff is considered, the ease of use, the ease of deployment, all that sort of thing is considered as these systems are being designed. So, well, guys, it was fascinating talking about this stuff. Thanks for coming and talking with us, Sandy and Lance. Appreciate it, guys. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your summer. I wish we were doing some gigs, but soon enough. I know.
Oh,
yeah, go ahead, Lance.
Can't wait to see you in catering.
Yeah, right.
Bump into you at some weird festival somewhere, and you know, hey, what's going on, Scott?
Yeah, but I know that so many people that I talk to just miss live music, and we all do it because we love it, and it's super fun to be in a room with other people enjoying an experience happening just in that one place, even if it's broadcast or streamed or whatever. You know, nothing replaces being in a room with people with that energy and that live music. So I know we're all looking forward to getting back there hopefully sooner than later, but we'll see what goes down. But thanks again, guys, and thanks for everyone for coming by. We'll have another webinar here in about 2.5 weeks. Stay tuned on your email for that. And until next time, we'll see you guys.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Lance.
See you later. Good to see you. Good to see both of you.
Likewise. Bye.